Will you ask Mr. Stokes to come back in, please? Yes, right, Mr. Stokes, ready to carry on?
Sir.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Stokes, can we now turn to a separate topic, which is fire safety information given to residents? Now, if I could take you first of all to an email chain of the 14th of April 2016, and that can be found at TMO 008655780 and page 2. And we see at the very bottom of page 2 an email from Barbara Matthews to Janice Ray, fire safety information. If we can go to the top of page 3. It says, Janice, please could you provide a list of where the information is held? That's fire safety information. And how we provide it to residents, existing and new, and how often we do reminders. And if we could go to the bottom of page 1 of this chain, you'll see Janice Ray's response starts there, 14th of April, and if we turn to the top of page 2, you see at the penultimate line of the email, Carl also often posts copies of the LFB leaflet through doors. First of all, is that something you did, post leaflets through doors?
Yes.
Do you know what particular leaflet Janice Ray is referring to here?
I can't remember the title. It is 2 pages of A4, and on one side it looks like a Lego block of flats, and it was the fire services LFB's leaflet from their website.
So, Home Fire Safety Guide for Homeowners, does that sound familiar?
Without seeing it.
Well, let's have a look. CST 000-16719. That's not it. If I could ask CST 000-17272.
Yes, there should be a second page, I believe.
But does that look familiar?
Yes, it does.
Who'd give those leaflets to you?
I think that was copied down off their website. Initially,
Who downloaded it from the website? Was it you or Janice Ray?
I'm going to say myself. They initially were printed copies, and then I believe they couldn't get any more from the LFB, so it was downloaded off the website.
And you did that at the request of Janice Ray, is that right? The posting of these leaflets? Or was it something you spontaneously did?
I think it was something that when they ran out of the leaflets, it was a case of it was photocopied and put through the doors.
But did you put the leaflets through doors at the request of Janice Ray?
I can't say whether it was requested of Janice Ray or it happened.
How often would you do that?
I can't say every time. Mostly it was for the smaller premises rather than the bigger blocks, because in the bigger blocks, the caretakers at one point, an example would be at the World's End complex. On the desk there at the concierge, they had boxes provided by the LFB and people could just pick them up. So it was the smaller ones predominantly where I would drop them through.
Can you remember whether you posted these in flats at Grenfell?
I would say no, because there was a dedicated caretaker and it was part of the Lancaster West estate, so the caretakers would have done it, or the ESAs would have done it.
Oh, what other steps would you take to disseminate fire safety information to residents?
Personally,
Yes.
none.
Just this?
Yes.
Now, can I turn to a separate topic, which is your involvement and knowledge of the FRA backlog on significant actions? Now, were you made aware by Janice Ray or anyone else that FRA actions were challenging to resolve?
I knew that some were, yes.
When were you first made aware of that?
I can't give a specific date. I can't. No, sorry.
Can you remember, for example, that there was a problem regarding a backlog as early as January 2012? Does that ring any bells with you?
There was a. I'm going to say it was a software changeover, and it started then, so it would have been a long time ago.
And did Janice Ray ever seek practical advice from you as to how best to resolve FRA significant action backlogs as quickly as possible?
No.
Were you ever asked to carry out a system-wide review or audit of the TMO's fire risk management system?
No.
Do you recall a meeting with Michael Lyons, a health and safety manager of Repairs Direct, in January 2014, once he had started at Repairs Direct, to bring him up to speed with your fire risk assessment programme?
It's not something that jumps to mind, but there were some meetings where Repairs Direct people were involved, and on the agenda items at some point, if we had an item that was consistently being brought up, we would discuss it.
Now, let's see if I can help your memory there. If we can go to CST 000-21675. Now, there you go. That's an email from Janice Ray to you organising a meeting.
Okay.
Does that ring any bells?
No.
Okay. Can you remember anything specific that was discussed at that meeting?
No, not without seeing any minutes, no.
Can you remember at any stage having any discussion involving you, Janice Ray, and Michael Lyons about how best to clear the backlog of FRA actions?
Again, without minutes, no. Sorry.
Were you aware of, even in broad terms, the volume of the backlog at any particular time?
Not. I knew there was a backlog, and I could see sometimes when I asked for the W2 sheet, there would still be items outstanding. So I knew there was, but not how big the backlog was, no.
So when you were preparing your FRAs of Grenfell, can you help us? What particular information would you have about the scale of the backlog of significant actions?
Well, I would ask for the previous FRA, the W2
a printout,
and that would be about it. And then I would work on what was on that piece of paper in front of me.
Did you ever have cause to emphasise to Janice Ray, or indeed anyone else at the TMO, the importance of closing out outstanding significant FRA actions?
I think that was had more than once, that conversation.
With Janice Ray?
It would have been, yes, and yes, their health and safety team.
And those conversations would have been outside the four square of the fire risk assessment itself?
Where we had a meeting or where I had to go into the office, yes.
What was the gist of the views you expressed about the importance of closing out such actions? Can you help the panel?
I can only, it would be along the lines that work has to be undertaken. If it's highlighted, it has to be undertaken.
Could I ask you to turn to an email of 13th of November 2015, and that's at CST 0002212, and it's an email, as I said, from Alex Bosman to you. Hi, Carl. I've been working through completing a number of FRA actions and have identified a number of queries. Please could you review the attached and provide a response against each action? Now, pausing there in the text, which we'll come back to, he attached a spreadsheet, and we can find that at CST 0002213. Thank you. And we can see column A set out various properties. And it's got in column K, FRA action, reading from left to right. And then it may be useful if we look at row 9, so scroll down slightly to Pembridge Square. Thank you, there we go. And just reading across that, we can see that the FRA was complete on the 28th of February 2014. We read along to column H that it was a high priority. The action itself was external steps up to the building entrance door are slightly damaged. And then in column Q, reading all the way across, got passed to RD, awaiting update. And then in the very final column, column S, we see the question, please justify the fire risk and why this has been listed as high risk. Would you ever be given an explanation, say, looking at the Pembridge Square example, of why an FRA significant action had been outstanding for 20 months?
No, this is unusual to get something like this.
Now, did you discuss the contents of this spreadsheet with Alex Bosman that you can remember?
I don't know if I went back to Alex Bosman or went to Janice Ray with this.
And did you discuss the apparently slow rate of closing off significant actions with Janice on the basis of this spreadsheet and the information in it?
I can't say for definite. I went and said, why haven't these been closed out? But as you can see there, they're asking the question, why are the steps of a building a fire risk? Well, it's the means of escape coming out. So that's the question I would have.
That's something I wanted to ask you next. You see in column S, it's a repeated question for you to justify the fire risk. Was that something that Alex Bosman or indeed anyone else at the TMO persisted in asking you?
I think this, again, I can't remember for definite, but this was, I think, the first or only, I think this is the first time this happened. I can't remember for definite. I had been asked questions previously, why do you consider this a fire risk? But the one that you've highlighted there, Pembridge Square, is because it's on the means of escape route out of the building. Therefore, it's a risk.
Now, you say this hadn't been that question had not been raised with you in the past. Was it a question that was asked thereafter, so from November 2015 onwards?
I cannot remember.
Now, if we could go back to the email, sorry, I interrupted by taking us to the spreadsheet. Thank you. And turning to the second paragraph of that email, Alex Bosman said this: I'm keen to reduce the number of actions we receive and ensure that those that are raised are proportionate to the risk that is present on site at the time. I understand that you may wish to highlight concerns in addition to formal FRA actions. However, it would be helpful to raise these outside of the FRA process to ensure the process is manageable. Did you discuss that request with him?
I think I discussed this with Janice Ray and said, these are in the FRAs because they are to do with fire.
Did Alex Bosman or indeed Janice Ray invite you to change your practice in terms of identification of the risk or the classification of priority of the action that was required?
I can't remember specifically that being asked, but I wouldn't have done anyway.
No, you wouldn't have changed your practice?
These are here because, like I said, with the steps at Pembridge, it's on the means of escape route, so therefore it's to do with fire. I was asked questions a lot, like why is the carpet damaged on the staircase a fire risk? Well, because someone could trip down the threads as they fell down the stairs, as they went down the stairs.
Now, you responded 3 days later on the 16th of November 2015. And if I could take you first of all to the covering email, which is at CST *02482. I show you this just to sort of remind you, Mr. Stokes.
Yes.
There you go. Halfway down the page, Janice with my comments added. Would you like to read first before I forward on to Alex? And then if I could take you to the spreadsheet on which you put your comments, which is at CST *02483. It'd be probably quite useful. Say if we go to row 9 that dealt with Pembridge Square. And then it's just to flesh out the answer you gave. The comments at column T effectively replicate what you've just told the panel. Would you accept that?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, do you know if Janice Ray read and took on board your comments, to use that inelegant phrase?
I can't, so you'd have to ask that question to her. I can't remember.
Can you remember whether she made any comments on your comments?
I can't remember, sorry.
Can you remember whether you forwarded your spreadsheet to Alex Bosman in the end?
That's what the email said before I forwarded it on, so I would have forwarded it on if Janice would have... I mean, imagine Janice would have come back to me and I would have forwarded it on.
Do you remember any subsequent conversation with Alex Bosman about the substance of your comments on this spreadsheet?
No.
Now, apologies, it's difficult trying to remember things more than a few years ago, but there seems to have been a meeting held sometime around the 20th of November 2015, and if we can go to it, it's CST 000-26106/3. Go back a page. Now there seemed to be a meeting on the 20th of November. We go on to the first page. Apologies, doesn't seem to be quite. There we go. Oh, hang on. Instructed 20th of November 2015. See, roughly halfway down. We took it from that there'd been a meeting on that date, but I don't know whether that helps you.
No, sorry.
Don't worry. Now, could I turn to page 2 of this email? And it's the final email, which starts, "Hi Janice," at the bottom of that page, sent by Alex Bosman, 1655. It says, "Further to our meeting and Carl's advice that FRA actions could be closed once we can give evidence contractors have been engaged, investigation has begun. Can you confirm if W2 actions can be closed if this evidence is concluded?" Now, you can just see right above that Janice Ray forwarded that to you. Now, did you agree or disagree with Alex Bosman's suggestion as to the evidence that was required?
Without seeing it, I can't remember this email, but my understanding reading this would be that it should be complete. If it's going to be closed out, work must be completed. You can start the work on a set date, but then there must be evidence that it's been completed.
Because the impression here is that Alex Bosman is trying to expedite closing of significant actions. Can you remember any further discussions with him about the evidence that would be required satisfactorily to close off outstanding significant actions?
Not specifically, but I'm going to say that I would have said you have to have evidence that the work has been completed to the correct standard.
Can you remember from late 2015 onwards whether Alex Bosman's recommendation was accepted or not accepted in terms of the evidence required to close out outstanding actions?
I wouldn't know that, but I would know that when I went back to do the risk assessment next time, if the W2 said it was closed out and I got there and it wasn't, I would be really, really raising questions on why.
And when you did do subsequent FRAs, do you remember that being a problem, that W2 indicated that an action had been closed off when it hadn't?
No, it doesn't. It's not one of those ones that springs to mind that says that was a problem.
Thank you. Now, the next topic I'd like to raise with you is your knowledge of concerns that have been raised about the fire risk assessments by others with the TMO. Now, during your time as a fire risk assessor for the TMO, did Janice Ray ever raise any issues with you about your competency or suitability of your fire risk assessments?
No.
Did she ever raise with you any concerns that had been raised by the LFB about your competence or the suitability of your assessments?
No, because the document would have been given to LFB at the initial stage and they'd looked at them all the way through.
Did she ever raise with you any specific concerns raised by Rebecca Burton of the LFB regarding competence and the suitability of your fire risk assessments?
The name rings a bell, and it's to do with a comment made by senior officers at a meeting, and she says, without evidence of minutes, you shouldn't be saying that in the document.
And was that passed on to you by Janice Ray at the time?
It would have been, because I've never met Rebecca Burton.
Rebecca Burton.
Yeah.
But to the best of your knowledge, recollection rather, Janice Ray never raised any concerns or reservations about you or your FRAs at any time?
No, not.
Now, the final topic that I'd like to discuss with you is a report completed by Matt Hodgson in September 2013 entitled Safety Management Review. First of all, can you recall that report, or indeed Mr. Hodgson at all?
No, it doesn't. It's not a familiar name.
Could we turn to TMO 00873398? That's the front page. And if I could ask you to turn to page 31. Now, one of the things that Mr. Hodgson focused on was the FRA programme and completion rates of FRA actions documented between the 28th of February 2013 and the 17th of July 2013. You'll see that from the final sentence at the bottom of the page. Now, if we turn over to page 32 and look at the top of the page, you'll see fourth and fifth down the number and percentage of actions that have been completed respectively by Assets and Regeneration Surveying and Assets and Regeneration Building Services, and it was 39 and 34% respectively. Now, stopping there, were those statistics something about which you were aware at the time?
No.
Now, just below that summary table of statistics, Mr. Hodgson said this: Assets and Regeneration have expressed some concern regarding the validity and practicality of some of the remedial works raised in the FRA reports. The issue was raised at meeting of 15th of August and has been investigated in more detail in consultation with the contractor. Then if we go to the bottom of this page, recommendations 23. Investigate the assets and regeneration concerns in relation to the recommendations raised in the FRA reports and seek opportunities to simplify and streamline the process. It was understood that a consultation with Carl Stokes and Associates was to be arranged. Now, do you recall a meeting being arranged with you to discuss the Hodgson report and his recommendation?
It doesn't spring to mind, no.
Do you have any recollection of the substance of this issue? So a concern to simplify and streamline the FRA process. Do you remember that being raised with you in late 2013 or indeed at all during the time you worked for the TMO?
No, as I said, we'd have meetings where if a specific item come up and it could be dealt with as an item on an agenda, for instance, as I explained before, like fire extinguishers, that was an issue that could try to be raised, but this does not spring to mind as an item.
Ms. Stokes, thank you for the moment. Sir, we've reached the point where I'd be grateful for a break to see if there are any questions I've not asked which I ought to.
Yes, and no doubt pick up others.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Stokes, Mr. Kinnear thinks he's reached the end of his questions.
Oh.
But he needs to have a short time in order to check that there's nothing that he's omitted. And we also need to allow time for those who are following the proceedings but not in this room to suggest questions which they think perhaps ought to be asked. So we'll break now. Is quarter of an hour going to be enough, Mr. Millett?
20 minutes I'd ask for.
20 minutes, all right. We'll break now until 2:45 then, please.
So,
Usual rules, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it while you're out of the room.
so.
And if you come back at 2:45, we'll see if there are still a few questions we need to ask you.
So.
All right, thank you. I'd like to go to the usher, please. Right, Mr. Cadeo, 2:45.
Thanks, sir.
Yes, would you ask Mr. Stokes to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Stokes. Well, we'll see if there are any more questions for you.
Sir.
Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Sir, thank you. I just have one more question for you, Mr. Stokes. With the benefit of having given evidence over these past 4 days and with the benefit of fuller reflection, is there anything you would have done differently?
It's a question I've reflected on, or an issue I've reflected on constantly. I believe that I undertook the risk assessments to the best of my ability and within the requirements of the fire safety order. But I'm dreadfully sad because of the people that lost their lives and were injured, and also how it's affected their family and friends.
Mr. Stokes, thank you, and it leaves me to thank you for attending to give evidence to the inquiry.
Oh, sir.
Well, Mr. Stokes, it's right that I should thank you as well on behalf of all the members of the panel. You've been giving evidence for the best part of 4 days. It must have been quite an ordeal, and we're very conscious of the fact that people do find it difficult to come and do this. But I'd like you to know we do find it very helpful to hear what you and others come to tell us. It's very valuable to us, and we're very grateful to you for coming along. And now the ordeal's over, and you're able to go.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Right, would you like to go with the usher then, please?
Sir.
Well, Mr. Kinnear, thank you very much. That concludes Mr. Stokes' evidence, obviously.
Yes.
Our next witness is going to be Janice Ray, is that right?
Next Monday.
And she's going to come on Monday of next week.
That's right, sir.
And for anyone who's watching, for the reasons that I explained earlier, we're not able to call Janice Ray this week, and we're going to start her evidence on Monday of next week at 10 o'clock. So we break now until 10 o'clock next Monday.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much indeed.